Okay. All right. No. All right. Do we have enough of a group to start the meeting? Good evening, commissioners. My name's Sue Disciple. I'll be the facilitator for the meeting. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Do we have enough people to start the meeting? I'm only seeing about 3 or 4 tiles from my end.
With the screen share, you'll only see a few, but there are 12 and one more is about to join.
Okay.
You're never going to see them.
All right.
They're only going to pop up every second.
Okay, got it.
Oh, sorry. Can you set up the interpretation, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let me see if I can start again here. So my name's Sue Disciple. I'll be the facilitator for the meeting. It's a little disconcerting not being able to see everybody who's out there, but welcome. So can we move the slide deck forward so we can talk a little bit about the purpose of the meeting today? So the purpose of the meeting today is to plan for required commission logistics, build infrastructure for the PAC organization, and to learn more about public meeting rules and regulations. So that's where we will start off. Next one, can you advance the slides for me, please? So the agenda will consist of mostly procedural, all procedural issues. We aren't going to be covering any of the kinds of topics that the PAC is chartered to do. We'll be talking about procedural and logistical work. So some announcements. This is being recorded. We have closed captioning on this for this event. I'm going to ask Shamir here in a bit if he can give a little bit of technical assistance for people who want to access those kinds of resources. We also have a Spanish language translation, and there is sign language, I believe. Shamir, could you give me a thumbs up if that is correct? Okay, and then could you tell people a little bit about accessing those resources?
Yes, so just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded for folks that can't make it tonight. We also have closed captioning enabled, as you can see at the bottom. Please keep in mind that it is not an exact transcript, as it is automatic, and it should not be viewed as exact quotes. The chat function has been disabled. We do have the question and answer feature enabled tonight. That's something newer that we're trying out, and we'll talk about that more when we get to it. But when you ask a question using the Q&A feature in the meeting tools at the bottom of the screen, it should allow for a question to be visible to the hosts and panelists, and they can answer it. If they answer it, you'll see the question and answer together. Additionally, with relation to interpretation, the ASL will be available via video. You can see their names. It's in the name of the user that the two ASL interpreters are sharing an account. And in terms of Spanish interpretation, and perhaps Felia can explain this in Spanish afterwards, we will have the ability to go to the meeting controls. You may have to hit more and go to interpretation and select Spanish. At that point, your video feed will be kept as is. Your audio feed will switch over to Spanish. If in the future for Police Accountability Commission meetings, there are any requests for other spoken language interpretation, please email the staff at policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov in advance of the meeting, and there'll be an attempt made to find an interpreter for that language as well. Thank you, and I'll pass it back over to Sue.
Great, thanks, Amir. So one other point too that I think we should make is that we're not really going to be engaged in, well, I guess I said already, we won't be engaged in the substance of your work. This is a procedural discussion. Also, we won't be taking comments from the public, except during certain sections where there will be, as Samir said, a chat function. We won't be able to answer all those questions that are submitted because of time, but they will come in with a specific address for the person who posed the question, and each question will be followed up on. So I think those are the logistics. Before we go through our own phases of work and scheduling and roles and responsibilities work that we have in front of us tonight, we'll have a training in public records and meetings with the Senior Deputy Director, Jennifer Johnston. Then we'll go on, we'll develop our consent agenda. We'll consider phases of work. We'll consider interim roles and responsibilities and themes for the organizational phase of the PAC. And we'll propose organizational phase roles and committees. The scheduling will be discussed for your meetings, both of the commission and committees. And we'll have some time just for some good of the order discussion and comment. That is the agenda for this meeting. Does anybody have any questions? Hearing none, let's move on. Oh, okay. Dan. Hi, Dan.
Oh, hi. Well, I guess maybe this is for when we get to the consent agenda part, but on the agenda, I would very much like to see some place for the 18 or so people who are now attending in the audience to weigh in. So hoping we can figure out a way for that to happen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Dan. Okay, let's move on. So questions that will be answered during this meeting. Commission members will be asked to accept items on the consent agenda, the agenda for today's meeting, the meeting report from last week's social event, the interim community standards to use until the PAC collaboratively is able to develop its own ongoing community standards. The PAC will also work tonight to answer the following questions. Can the PAC agree to use the draft interim roles and responsibilities as a starting point while developing more permanent systems? Can the PAC agree to adopt the organizational phases for proposed themes / goals, internal processes, values, and principles of community engagement, and scoping, agenda setting? And then how should the PAC let me, since things are popping up in my screen, let me get to my script here and not try to read around objects showing up on my screen here. So then we'll talk about how should the PAC organize itself during its organizational phase and achieve this in terms of timelines and committees. And then scheduling. Shall the PAC schedule a meeting during the December 18th time slot? If so, for the full PAC or for a committee? And then when should the January PAC and committees meetings be?
No, they want you to say PAC instead of PAC.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry, PAC. I don't know if I've ever really heard it spoken. I've seen it written. So thank you for correcting me. All right. Can we move on to the next slide unless there's questions? Okay, so City Attorney Jennifer Johnston's here to answer any questions you may have from the training on public records or public meetings. She can also answer any additional questions on public records or public meetings, even if it wasn't covered in the trainings. We have time for a presentation as well as questions and answers. Can I turn this over to Jennifer? And just to remind people that if you have a question, raise your hand.
So my screen has changed. Can y'all see my initial screen about public records request?
Yes.
Okay. And I will try and keep an eye on the Q&A, but if I don't, maybe if the moderator could let me know that there's a question pending. I will tell you that I'm much more familiar with the public records issues than the public meetings. So if you have a particularly complicated public meetings question, I may take it back to the office and then get back to you with an answer to make sure you get accurate information. So as was already noted, I'm a senior deputy city attorney. I specialize in public records request, e-discovery, and other records issues for the city. There we go. So probably in your basic training, you covered the definition of public records law. Public records is fairly broad. It's any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business. And in a separate definition, writing is defined to mean symbols, audio, any type of recording, pictures, sound. So writing is much broader than you might think. So basically, when you take these two definitions together, a public record is anything that is recording the city's business, the public's business, the work that we do on behalf of the city, and that's a public record. And the public records can be requested by anyone, and once requested, we need to provide those records to anyone who wants to ask for them. We do not have to create a new record if we do not have them, which gets a little complicated, say for data in a computer system. But we might have to export that data in the computer system, but we wouldn't have to, say, create a new computer program to export that data. Or, if someone asked for data in a particular format and that's not how we had it, we wouldn't have to assemble that. We would just have to provide the records that we have. The presumption.
Those papers that are right there. Oh,
Sorry, was that a question?
no.
Okay. The presumption is that every person has a right to inspect any public record of a public body. They do this by making a public records request. The City of Portland has an online system, but if you can't access the online system, we have paper requests that can be made, and those are translated into 10 languages. And we also have a public records helpline that people can call if they can't access either the online system or the paper system, so we can help them make that request. Then once that request is made, we need to provide either the records or an estimate of when we will provide the records and the cost of it within 15 business days. So if we contact one of y'all and let you know that there's a records request, we need a fairly quick response because the time is ticking. And there are these statutory deadlines for us to get records out to whomever has requested them. And we respond usually now by providing an electronic copy of most records. And the statute says you can meet your requirements by giving the ability to inspect, but particularly with COVID, that hasn't been used. And generally, we send out an electronic copy in most situations. Again, the presumption is that the records are available unless the city can cite an exemption for them not to be provided. And some of those exemptions exempt an entire document. Some of those exemptions exempt particular pieces of information, and then we redact or black out those particular pieces of information. And the reason it's blacked out, when I tried to describe that we black out so it'll be transparent, somebody laughed at me. But basically you mark it so that people can see what was redacted, and you don't want to just white it out so they can't tell what wasn't provided. That way, whoever asked for the documents can see, oh, there's a black box here, there was something redacted. And then the city has to provide a statute that says what exemption we are asserting to not provide the information, because again, the presumption is that we provide the information. So if we're not, we have to cite a statute. Generally, the identity and motive or need of the person requesting access does not matter as to whether or not the records are exempt or not. So, they could be bored on Friday night and want to read some city records. We don't get to ask why they want them. They ask for the records, we provide them. Now, sometimes there are certain conditional exemptions that make the records exempt unless there is a certain public interest. In those situations, we get to ask about why you want the documents, but they only apply if the exemption, if we were able to assert the exemption in the first place, and then we get to the secondary consideration if there's a public interest that overrides that exemption. So as a basic premise, when people put in their public records request, we don't ask, why do you want these records? There's probably one exception to that. We do ask under state law if they plan to use them for federal immigration purposes, because if they're going to use them for federal immigration purposes, under state law, certain things have to be redacted because we do not provide that information to the federal government to use for immigration enforcement. One of the limited exemptions that can be applied is communicating with a city attorney, me, but it has to be to get legal advice or services. You can't just copy a city attorney on an email and make that exempt. It has to be about seeking legal advice or legal services. If it is about legal advice or legal services, and there's another city employee who needs that advice to act on it or comply with the advice, it can be afforded to another city employee, or in this case, another city volunteer to act on that advice, but it can't be sent outside the city or that would waive the privilege. Blanket copying the city attorney will not make things confidential, because if you just copy me on things that aren't about legal advice, we're going to release them, okay? So then the exemption won't apply. If you're in doubt and you have concerns, you can contact the city attorney's office, or you can contact the staff representative for the Police Accountability Commission if you have concerns about that situation. One of the other issues that probably came up in your earlier training is records retention. So we have records and we have to keep them for a certain length of time. And the more important the records, the longer they have to be kept. So for example, records of the mayor's office have to be kept permanently, which they've defined as 500 years. The sticky notes that I'm writing on my desk here to help remind me to make a phone call are considered transitory. So as soon as I call the person back, I can recycle them. I sent 2 handouts. One was about notes and one was about transitory records. They give a little more detail about things that you can get rid of right away, transitory records. which is the nice city way of basically saying trash, all of the unsolicited email you might get in your city email box. Emails as employees, when we were in the office, we used to get, there's donuts down the hall, the donuts are gone now. That kind of stuff we can delete right away. It's transitory or trash. The other piece of guidance, like I said, was notes guidance that distinguishes between, say, if you took notes, if you were the official note taker, say, of this commission and you were doing the meeting minutes, those notes would have a longer retention than if I took notes during the meeting of a couple of to-dos that I wanted to follow up on. When I crossed off those to-dos and I was done with that, I would be allowed to recycle those to-dos. And again, those two handouts help distinguish some of those situations, so you know what you can get rid of and what you need to save. Again, the retention period is the minimum and maximum you should keep records, and it's determined by the content of the record. It would be easier if like all text messages were kept for 2 years, but that's not how the state system is set up. Some text messages we have to keep for 500 years. Some text messages we might be able to delete. It depends on the content of the record. And needless to say, if there is a public records request pending, or if there's a legal hold because there's litigation, you cannot get rid of anything, even if it was the sticky notes on your desk or that to do. You have to save it until the records request is filled or the litigation legal hold is lifted. If you put something in your deleted items folder, it will be deleted automatically after 60 days. You don't get any notice of that because we expect you to only put trash in your deleted items folder. You can delete it sooner. So you can go into your deleted items and anything there you can delete, because again, we are assuming that the things you put in your deleted items are the things that you do not need to retain. For most people, the things that they need to focus on retaining are the things they send, because those would be the unique records that you would be responsible for. So those things in your sent email, you would want to retain and just leave them in your sent email. A question that comes up quite often for employees and sometimes for volunteers is promising confidentiality to members of the public. And basically, we cannot promise confidentiality in most situations. So there are a few limited situations where a bureau has an approved policy and meets the 5 standards to collect confidential information. But in most instances, you cannot get information from the public and promise them you will keep it confidential. If a situation comes up where you think you need to obtain information and promise confidentiality, you need to contact the city attorney's office, because the way the law is set up is if they give us the information, we cannot give them confidentiality later. We have to have the system in place for confidentiality and then have them ask for confidentiality when they submit the information. One of the things we can do is make sure that the information we are getting from the public is information we actually have a business need for, and that we don't collect any extra information. And so if at some point y'all end up doing any surveys as part of your work or public outreach, you would want to talk with us so that we could be mindful of the information we are collecting from the public. Because sometimes we might not collect identifying information to make sure that the public feels comfortable sharing, more personal or specific information. So we might not collect their names, or we might not collect their addresses. We might say collect a zip code so we could identify a general area, but not something specifically identifying to protect their privacy. So those are things that you would want to think about before you gather the information. The other thing that we want to talk about, particularly with volunteers, is that you do not want to create or store public records on personal devices, because if you do, and we get a request, we may have to come get your personal device and export all of the material from that. So y'all were all set up with city emails. Those city emails can be accessed through the Outlook app on your phone, and that will keep the email information segregated from your personal information. Those emails are stored on city servers so that we will take care of maintaining and retaining those emails, so you won't have to worry about that. But you do not want to be using your personal email address to send emails about your work on the Police Accountability Commission, because those personal emails, if they are about your business on the Police Accountability Commission, could be requested, and then someone might have to review your personal email and say, yes, that's city business, no, that's not. Or you might be required to review it and sign a declaration that you did that review and what was personal and what was city business. Text messages and social media can also be public records if they are about the city's business. So you should not use your personal phone to send text messages about the Police Accountability Commission unless those text messages are transitory as defined on the handout I sent to you. So if you need to text somebody, I'm running late for the meeting, you could send that message by text. You still need to delete that message, but you should not send anything substantive on your personal phone. So, you know, I'm concerned about the commission's decision on blah, blah, blah. You would never want to send that by text. That could be a public record. Then we would have to get that text off your phone. And it's not always an easy process to do that. Social media, if it is about the conduct of the city's business, can also be a public record. So if the Police Accountability Commission wanted to have an official social media page, that's something you should talk about with your city staffer. But what you don't want to do is post on your social media, you know, I'm a commissioner and this is what I think, and this is what we're discussing, and I think we should have a committee that does this, and next week I'm going to vote this way. You know, all of those kind of specific things about the commission could turn your personal social media page into a public page, which could create all kinds of situations. You know, if it's a public page, there are limits on who you can unfriend and not friend. You might have to make it open to the public. We might have to retain all of the information on it. So you want to be careful not to make your personal social media page a public page. Now, on the other hand, if there's something that is posted on any of the city's pages and you just forward it, you know, look, there's a commission meeting coming up. Y'all might want to come and participate. Or the city has job openings, you know, you might want to apply. Just forwarding information already on the city's page would not convert your personal page to a public page. So you can go ahead and forward things already posted on the city's page, and that's fine, because the record copy is on the city's page, you're just forwarding it. Now, if you forward it and had a lot of discussion in your role as a commissioner, that could create problems, okay? And then here are some best practices. You know, again, don't use your personal email or text for city business. It's not only prohibited by the city rules, but it creates problems because people will then want to look at your personal devices, which the city tries to avoid, because we want you to have a personal life, and most people want to have a personal life. Occasionally, people will accidentally use the wrong email. And if that ever happens to you, forward the email. Like if you accidentally use your personal email instead of your city email for communication, forward that personal email to your city account, and then it's in the right place, and delete it out of your personal account. Then the public record is in the city account. And again, use your Outlook app on your personal phone. Don't use personal text unless it's transitory. this probably doesn't come up as much for y'all, but used to folks would email city work home to their personal email, do work, and then email it back. And that is a practice that is not accepted and is prohibited by city rules. City employees have OneDrive that they can use to work at home. And so if there is a document that you needed to work on for police accountability, we can help you figure out a way to do that. I encourage people to share documents through a link, a OneDrive link, and your city staffer can usually share that document through y'all to email so you can view it. And then I also encourage people to just keep the final record copies of documents. We are not required to keep drafts. It sometimes leads to confusion about which document is actually the final document when we have multiple drafts floating around, especially with a large group of people working on them. If you do have drafts, though, and they are requested in a public records request, we would have to provide them. Drafts are not exempt from disclosure. Drafts would have to be provided, but drafts do not have to be retained. They're transitory once we have a final document. So you can get rid of them to make sure that the document that we retain for public records purposes is the final record copy. All right, so that is my presentation, and I will stop sharing, I hope. But I wanted to make sure I left time for questions.
Questions, anybody?
The question I see, I don't think is one I can answer. About where the record of today's meeting will be located.
So it's Debbie.
Okay, Debbie?
Hi, I'm a member of a nonprofit organization and report monthly when we, before our board meetings on things that I've been doing as a volunteer. And so if I want to do a report to the board about, how things are going with this commission, how do I do that? I mean, because usually I make a Word document and email it to them along with all the other things this isn't the only thing, but a list of things. So do I just need to quit doing that, or is there a way to do it within the bounds of these rules?
So I'm sorry, who are you sending this report to?
To a board of directors of a nonprofit organization I'm involved with. And we meet monthly and I kind of update them on all the different issues that we work on and what's happened. And so, paragraph on each one. So I was thinking, I was trying to picture this. If I just lifted information out of the minutes, for example, from tonight, and did a short synopsis based on what was in the public record of these minutes, and then put it in a Word document, emailed them from my personal email address, would that be okay?
That would be okay. That would not be conducting the city's business, and it would just be repeating part of the minutes. So it would not be creating a new record, and it would not be conducting the city's business.
Great, thank you.
So that should be fine if you're just sending information from the minutes onto a different group.
But even if I'm rewriting it in my own words, because minutes can be 3 pages long, and if I want to boil that down into 3 sentences, so I mean it would be synthesizing and relaying information that's already out in the public, for example, from these minutes. Is that something I can do?
I believe you can summarize the minutes and you can send them to people in your personal capacity. The issue becomes, if you're just summarizing the minutes versus conducting city business, advocating for things that the commission is doing would become an issue. Okay, so I would just, tell you to be cautious about the line because you don't want to be conducting commission business. If it's just summarizing what happened at the last meeting from the minutes, that should be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Dan, I think you have a question.
Yes, and for the audience, my name is Dan Handelman. I'm with the group Portland Cop Watch, and I'm a member of the commission. I use he, him pronouns. Yeah, so you mentioned these documents, which I don't know if I received them, the handouts that explain stuff. You also talked about something called OneDrive, which I don't think we've been introduced to. I'm not sure what that is. I don't use Microsoft stuff usually. So maybe you can explain that. And on related note, when I respond to a request to attend a meeting, I found that Outlook is putting the invitation into the trash after I click on RSVP. And so I rescued those out of the trash because I thought I needed to save those because they were public records. Is that something I have to keep tracking down in the trash?
The record, okay, so the record of what meetings you attend in your Outlook is your calendar, which we have to keep for 1 year. And so your calendar should be set up to retain meetings that you accepted for 1 year. So if you are accepting those in your city email, there should be a city calendar attached where we could go look and see which meeting invites you accepted and which one you rejected. And that's considered the record copy for those meetings. So you do not have to save the meeting invites because that information should be on your calendar. Does that make sense?
I don't know how to find that calendar. I have no idea what you're talking about. So.
Well, I can follow up with Samir. I mean, it may not be a calendar that you have looked at. Are you just viewing your email or do you use the Outlook app?
I just log into Outlook on my web browser, so that's all I do.
Okay, so if you log into Outlook on your web browser, from my memory, there are some buttons you can click to access different things, and one of the buttons is the calendar. I know my Outlook is going to look a little different. I want to pause. I think we're switching interpreters. Okay, I know my Outlook is going to look a little different because I have some tools. You know, I think y'all are email only, and I have some other tools. As for the OneDrive is a they call it a SharePoint or a shared drive where city employees can put a document to share it with people who have city emails. And so if there's a document that your staff contact needed to share with all of you, he could put it there and share it with you. But maybe y'all decided that it's easier for all of you to just share it as an attachment. So you can certainly do that. It doesn't violate any rules to share it as an attachment if that makes it more accessible for y'all. You should do what works for this group and is accessible. It's just easier sometimes to track what the drafts are if there's just one copy.
Catherine?
Thank you, Catherine McDowell. I use she, her pronouns. And my question is, I'm a note taker. I tend to take notes on pretty much everything that's happening in my life. So how do we need to be managing notes, personal notes that we take in commission meetings?
So you should look at the notes guidance handout. And I sent Samir links earlier today, and he said not everybody could open the links. And so I resent them as attachments.
Okay.
In the hope that everybody would be able to get the actual documents. So that may be why y'all didn't get them before the meeting, because we were, you know, technology is fun. So we send them 5 or 6 ways until we can find a way that everybody can access the material. So if you didn't get them before the meeting, he will send them to you. But the notes guidance talks about different kinds of notes and when your notes need to be saved as the official record and when they're just personal to you and you can get rid of them if you want. Okay. And so from what you're telling me, Catherine, and again, I would encourage you to read the guidance to make sure what you're doing with your notes is what I'm understanding. But it sounds like, you know, you are not keeping the minutes. You are not taking notes because you're required to follow up on things. It's notes to help you remember and, assimilate the information. And so from the notes guidance from the city archivist, I would interpret those as notes that you can keep or you can get rid of because we have official minutes. Now, on the other hand, if you're on a subcommittee and you're taking notes and those are the record of the subcommittee's work, that might be different. So again, in different situations, you'll want to look at the guidance again. But Catherine, I think you can keep those notes for as long as they're useful to you and get rid of them when they're no longer useful. However, you should know, as long as you're keeping them, if someone asks for them, they are a public record that we would need to provide.
Are there other questions for Jennifer? Jennifer, do you have any closing comments? Anything people should have asked you but didn't?
There's going to be lots of weird things that come up over the course of your service, and we appreciate you serving. And we try and figure out ways so that you can serve and be a volunteer for the city and it not intruding your private life. That's why you have the city emails. So I do encourage you to use those. In the past, volunteers didn't have those, and we did have to search volunteers' private emails, and nobody liked that. I felt like it was intrusive, and the volunteers were pretty unhappy with that. And so I do want to encourage you to keep them separate to protect your privacy, because we don't want serving the city to be, some unwelcome invasion of your privacy. So do please try and keep, a little segregation between your private life and your work as a volunteer. And then if something else comes up, your staff contact has my email. You can email me a question and I will try and get you an answer and figure out your situation so that we can help you comply with the law and continue to serve, because we do appreciate it. And, we want it, again, to not be a terrible burden for you, but to figure out a way that you can, do the work we are asking you to do and still, meet these statutory requirements for the public of providing records and being transparent. So if something comes up, please reach out and we will, try and figure out some way to sort it and meet your needs. So thank you again, and just email me.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Sorry, I do have one more question for Jennifer.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much, Jennifer, for the presentation and the tutorial. I just wanted to follow up on Catherine McDowell's question about notes that we are taking during these meetings, and just sort of to clarify kind of what you guys just talked about. You talked about sort of a difference between notes that you take that are not the official minutes and that are just to help you remember things and to assimilate information, and versus notes that you might take in a subcommittee meeting that are specifically for work purposes, basically. Yeah, and so I just wanted to make sure that I understood. You said as long as we are keeping notes, as long as we have the notes, you said we can keep them as long as they're helpful and then destroy them when they're no longer helpful. But as long as we have them, they are a public record and would be responsive to a public record request. Does that apply to both those categories of notes?
If someone asks for notes taken at tonight's meeting, then folks who took notes would have to turn over their copies of their notes.
Okay, even if they were like relatively informal notes that were just
even if they are doodles that have stick figures with smileys and hearts, if they are notes taken at the meeting and that's what was requested, we would have to provide them. On the other hand, if what I did was take stick figures and doodles because maybe I need, a little bit of a fidget to help me focus, at the end of the meeting, I can throw that away because I'm not the official note taker. There's nothing on there I need to follow up with. So I would be allowed under our retention rules with those kinds of notes to follow up. And the reason I'm saying that y'all should read the notes guidance is, as you can imagine, notes covers a lot of different situations. And, I'm giving y'all a kind of a big picture once over lightly, because I know you have a lot of stuff going on, and I think I'm probably already over my time. And so, I have to-do notes I do every day, and I cross them off and I throw them away, right? Because they are chicken scratch, frankly, no one else can read them. And once I've done the thing, and like I said, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff, and it's covered in the notes guidance that those are transitory records. There are other kinds of notes that people take. Like, what if I'm the project manager and I'm documenting the steps? Those notes I might have to keep. And so, I was trying to give an example. If you are on the subcommittee and you are the note taker for the subcommittee, those could be official notes, and you might need to keep them longer because those are the official notes of the subcommittee recording the work of that subcommittee. But then on the other hand, you might be on the subcommittee again, just drawing hearts and flowers, and you might be able to throw those away as well. It depends on the kind of notes in your role. And so, yeah, please take a look at that guidance because it does give some different situations.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate all your attention, and I don't want to take up any more time, so I'm gonna go.
Thanks, Jennifer. And we go on to the next slide in the deck. So we reviewed the agenda for this meeting at the beginning of the session. So we have reviewed that, and the question is, can the PAC approve this agenda for use at this meeting? Or any reason not to approve the agenda for use at this meeting?
Hi, this is Dan. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Well, we don't have a decision-making process yet, so I don't know how we can approve anything. But that said, I did express that I would like, if there's any time, or even if there's not any time, I'd like to allow the people in the audience that, to have some input. So I don't know how we're going to get to that.
Yeah. Dan, I think the rationale for this meeting is that this is just procedure to be discussed tonight, and some ways to proceed until the commission has a formal process in place for things like, for exactly this, for things like voting on their agenda or voting on a motion. So I hear what you're saying, and it would be a shame if there wasn't ample time for comments on substantive issues, but we're not going to be taking up any substantive issues today. It's all process. So
I do agree with the point of what, like, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to be a contrarian, but we've never talked about, like, what are the how many people does it take to approve the agenda? And what happens if we don't approve the agenda? That's not a discussion we've had. So for all of us, does it have to be unanimous? Does it have to be 2/3? So there's just so many pieces procedurally that we haven't discussed that the question of, do we approve this consent agenda is sort of like, even though it's step 1B, we haven't even covered 0 or 1A of like, how as a body do we approve something?
Yeah, it is kind of, when we put this slide deck together and had a conversation about this, it's a chicken and an egg proposition. You can't really, we need an agenda for the meeting, but we don't have a formal process for adopting one. So it's just an awkward phase. And that's one of the reasons that the PAC needs to get through this process of creating its process and how it's going to proceed. We hadn't, so Dan, I think that there will be opportunities for the public to submit questions. And Samir, you should jump in and tell me I'm wrong about that if I am, but I think there will be some opportunity for that, and that staff will get back to people on their questions. But I think there's actually some easier questions on this agenda. So let's move forward. There was a draft meeting report for September 2nd, the meet and greet. It was distributed via email. Can the PAC agree to approve and post the meeting report for the December 2nd social? And I should probably turn that around and say, is there any reason we should not approve that report for posting?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Dan?
Hi. Sorry, I do not have any problems with that document. I am troubled by the idea of a consent agenda where we have no discussion about stuff, because again, we're a public body. This happens with the city council, and a lot of times things get swept under the rug that people are interested in. So I just want to make it clear to the people in the audience that these notes are there because we had a meeting that was not in the public eye. And once these notes are approved, people have an idea what we did last week at this private meet and greet. And that makes me, as somebody who feels that all of our meetings should be open, feel very good that we're going to have this document. So I just wanted to say that on the record.
Thank you, Dan. Any objections then to the posting of those meeting notes from the meet and greet? Hearing none, let's talk about 3. Interim community standards were distributed via email. Can the PAC agree to use the interim community standards until the PAC collectively develops its ongoing community standards? I will say I looked at the community standards over, and I thought that they were pretty robust. What do other people think? Can you approve them on an interim basis until you either get to amend them formally or adopt them formally? I guess to turn the question around, is anybody opposed to those standards and using them as your guidelines and your guiding lights? Hearing none, Dan, I hear what I really do hear your concern you raised about the agenda. I'm not really sure we necessarily even need to have to adopt the agenda, but we do have to agree that we will go on and consider phases of work for the commission, scheduling, and some good of the order discussion at the end of the meeting. And any objections to that? Hearing none, let's go on and start talking about process. So this piece is phases of work. Just to review it, because I know that some didn't have a chance to overview the slide deck before the meeting. First arrow, phases of work offer a way to break up the 18-month time frame of the commission into predetermined lengths of time. The future phases of work would be dependent on the agenda setting and scoping of work in the first phase, which is organizational in scope. Each phase provides a checkpoint when completed to review how the PAC is progressing in terms of internal methods, community involvement, engagement, and timelines. Successful City of Portland advisory boards and commissions use these methods and work in this way. It is easy for both members and the public to understand and keep track of. And here are the interim roles and responsibilities. So, and maybe we can take these one at a time. For co-chairs, co-chairs develop agendas, represent the commission for their phase to public and the media, rotates 2 or 3 at a time among members for the commission, for the full commission within the phases of work. And rotate 2 and 3 at a time among committee members that for that committee during a specific phase of work. That language is a little awkward. So does anybody have any questions about these interim roles and responsibilities for co-chairs?
Yes, I do have questions, and it was about the language.
Okay, yes.
Regarding rotating 2 to 3 at a time. Is it saying that there would be co-chairs representing the full commission, as well as co-chairs representing the subcommittees? Is that
Yes,
what those
I
final
think-
2 points
yes.
are saying? Okay.
Yes. Good question. Any other questions? For an interim basis, can the commission agree to adopt these basic guidelines for the roles of co-chairs? Anybody feel that any other questions or clarifications?
How long do the co-chairs hold these positions?
That's one of those things that's why this is interim. It's one of those things that has not been determined and will be determined in later phases of work.
Okay. And is the goal that everyone in the commission hold some co-chair position at some point?
I haven't read in your documentation that that's necessarily a goal.
Okay,
Some people might not wish to do it.
sure.
I think that for those who wish to do it, they would be put in the rotation.
Okay.
I should ask Samir. Samir.
That's correct.
That's my assumption, so, okay.
Yeah, and if someone wanted to co-chair for multiple times, that's not prohibited yet. The bylaws would clarify that the commission would write.
Okay.
At your discretion as members.
Yeah. So the meetings will be facilitated. The role of facilitators would be to co-develop agendas with the co-chairs and staff, city staff as staff is needed to assist with that. Chair meetings following the agenda and community standards. Is hired by city staff for meetings only, minimal duties between commission meetings. Not only calling on speakers, but also ensuring active, equitable, and constructive input from all commissioners. So again, interim thoughts about the role of facilitators. Can the group agree to adopt on an interim basis this role and responsibility of facilitators? And are there any questions? Can I assume we can adopt those interim roles and responsibilities then? Great. And so before I go on, I do want to disclose something. There is somebody who you probably have seen that you have on one of your tiles on Zoom that you haven't met. His name is Damian Rice. He may pop up from time to time. He is my technology support. So that he is attending the meeting so that I have tech support during this meeting. So I just wanted to clarify that. One thing I could use some tech help with, Damian, if you don't mind. I can't read the whole city staff roles and responsibilities column.
So check it out.
Yep. Thank you. All right, so roles and responsibilities for city staff. They develop agendas for the meetings and committees with the co-chairs and the facilitators. So they're participants in the room. They coordinate public input and communications. They hire meetings for hires meeting facilitators, community engagement support, interpreters, and other support, and communicates with commissioners on meeting dates, times, agendas, etc. So can the PAC, the PAC for now, adopt those interim roles and responsibilities for city staff? Or framed another way, does anyone have any objections to those or any questions or other considerations? Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the middle column again. And I just am kind of getting hung up on the word chairing for the facilitators. I guess I feel like the co-chairs would chair the meeting and the facilitator would facilitate the meeting. So it's just an odd use. I just want to be clear. I don't think somebody who is not a member of the commission should be chairing the commission meetings. So if we could, I guess I just want to, I don't want to, get caught up in just a word choice. If the intention is really facilitation, which is the name of the role, and not chair, but it matters because I think the commission should be chaired by, and the commission meeting should be chaired by somebody who's an appointed commission member.
I would agree that that is a bad choice of words. I would agree. I don't think a facilitator is the chair. So okay. I think that's a great amendment. So if others are good with that, let's revise that. A facilitator facilitates meetings. They don't chair it. So you're right. Debbie, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just thinking of another word, maybe conduct, but it facilitates the chosen word amongst you facilitators. That's what we could use.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that was a good call, I think, Catherine. Thank you. So then any other comments then about the city staff, the role and responsibility of city staff in this interim period?
So it says that they select or hire the meeting facilitators, the community engagement support, interpreters, etc. Is it of the commission to also recommend those people, or does city staff have some vetted list somewhere that they select from?
I don't know. I might ask Samir to weigh in on this.
That's a yes to both. City offered a list of folks, but as with the scheduling survey, city staff solicited in that scheduling survey suggestions for potential facilitators, as well as suggestions for potential other support. It was at the recommendation of commission members that we hired the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization for interpreters for today, for example, and we are pursuing other service providers as well based on suggestions from the commission.
I would not take it personally if people want to propose an alternative process for that role and responsibility. Okay, well, hearing none, I think that we've got tentative agreement here on the interim roles and responsibilities. Any further comments or concerns? Let's move on to the next slide in the deck. Oh, Dan, did you have a comment, Dan? Did I just see, did you signal you wanted to say something, Dan? Okay. I don't control the slides, folks. So if somebody, if the slide person is within earshot, could we move on? Okay. Oh, all right. It took it a while to load here. All right. Phases of work and organizational phase. So based on one-on-ones with the PAC members, that was conducted by city staff. 4 main themes of work for the organizational phase were identified. First, internal processes. So community guidelines, group principles, commissioners' expectations of each other, and bylaws or charter. Next arrow, values. So principles for output to reflect the big picture standard, to measure the commission's work by, guiding ethics for the new system that you're dealing with and that you're developing. Community engagement framework, how the commission will include the public in its work. How will the commission ensure particularly affected community voices are heard? And then scoping, parameters of commission work, major questions the commission needs to answer, agenda setting and ordering. So can the commission just adopt these themes of work? And we may want to come back to this question after we've done a little bit more work on the organization and fleshing out the themes. Oh, Jason?
Is this also an interim state, or is this going to be a continuing state?
It's an interim state, yeah, in that it's the phase, this phase of work is just your organizational work to get things set up. Your community guidelines refined and adopted, your bylaws or charter, your community engagement framework, all of that initial work required to get the PAC up and running is what this is. So kind of by nature, yes, it is temporary. When your processes are set up, then this organizational phase is done.
So some of these are actually permanent structural pieces, and some of them could be interim. Are you expecting these to all be interim until the commission can create its own structure, or are these permanent?
If I may.
Sure, Senior.
Thank you, Sue. This one is not designed to be interim. This is based on synthesizing feedback from the one-on-ones and saying that in the first phase of work, which is the organizational phase, that the goals of that phase would be to develop these 4 things. And these are based on the boxes that the commission members essentially framed things in during the one-on-ones. So it's not making decisions today on what those outputs are or anything like that, simply saying that during the first phase, these would be the first 4 things that are being worked on. And then everything else would be figured out and ordered as part of the agenda setting and ordering.
Did that answer your question, Jason?
It does. It doesn't get my vote, but it does answer my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Could you share with us what your concerns or issues are about it?
I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Okay. The floor is open. Any other comments or questions, thoughts?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So I have a question. So maybe framing it as like, this is the suggestion of the organizational phase, but as we've not really even conversed with one another, there may be other topics that come up to add or subtract from this phase. I think that would be something I'd feel comfortable agreeing to adopt, but it does, it feels a little overwhelming to be like, okay, here's the 4 things in the first phase when we've really not discussed any business matters together at all.
Yeah, I think though that the question here is, can we adopt the themes of work? We have to develop internal processes that will guide your work on a long-term basis. You have to establish your values, or in the one-on-ones, there was interest in having a suite of values for the PAC. you need a framework for community engagement, and you need to scope the parameters of your work, understand what the boundaries of your work and what the heart of your work is. So that process is temporary. It happens while you develop those long-term pieces. So I think that's the question. Maybe if we go on, can we leave this? Okay, Jason, you're shaking your head. Let's talk
Other
about
people
it.
would like to speak on this.
Well, okay, so I had a kind of a question or a thought, I guess. Yeah, I do agree with Faith that it seems like additional or possibly other important items may come up as a result of us talking with each other, as opposed to speaking as individuals. And I would say I don't mind. I can sort of see the questions that are answered kind of by each of these, you know, internal processes, sort of how are we doing our work, values, why are we doing our work, community engagement, with whom are we doing our work, scope, you know, what is the scope of the work. And I also see that there is a lot of overlap, for example, between values and internal processes. I see under internal processes group principles. Under values, I see principles for output to reflect. You know, those seem like very sort of similar things, and it seems like those two categories especially will really influence each other quite a bit. So those are my thoughts about that.
Yeah, thank you. What do others think? Yes.
I would like just to make a comment. And with the one-on-ones with Samir, I remember going over this with him. I understand the questions that people have because I had actually asked him at that time about this, because I actually wanted to see it. He had actually verbally said it, and then he showed it to me, and I got a better understanding. But I understood that it's just a focus of how we will go about doing our work. Just as Sue said, you know, if you're doing any kind of process, you have to have some kind of outline for that process. And the way I see it is sort of an outline as to keep us focused. And of course, there are overlapping things, and there are probably things that we want to add to that or take away from that. But I just look at it as an outline of things that we need to hit. And maybe the question would be, using your method, Sue, is there something that's not there that we may be missing that we want to put in right now? I just have that question because I know that this is going to be very broad, each of those. But if we're missing a main theme, I would be interested to hear someone's comment if they think we're missing something. That's my comments for now.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sophia. So are there any, so is something missing? I mean, setting aside Jason's concern about, you know, what this means, is this something we should be working on now? Are we setting stuff in stone before we really have gotten our feet wet with our most basic process? I mean, I think, Jason, I'm trying to interpret your comments, and I would welcome you clarifying further your position. But Sophia's question is, is there something missing from this list? Since this is about developing foundational processes, is there something missing? Debbie and Dan. Oh, Dan, you've had your hand up, but let me take Debbie and then I'll get to you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. It seems to me we could, I mean, I can understand that some of us might feel like it's possible we could sit down and start working on some of this and then all of a sudden realize that there's a hole in this list. So would it be possible to add and, you know, and that we're open to adding to this if necessary that this list, we're not limited to this list. If something comes up that we forgot about, we can still handle that during this organizational phase.
No, that's my question is, are we committed to this list or not? And the answer has been so far that we would be, by voting on this, committed to this list.
Well, you're not voting on this tonight and that
You're
you're
asking us to agree to it.
agree. Well, right. Dan. Dan, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Didn't unmute my phone. Getting to Jason's concerns, I'd like to go back to what Lovisa said, and well, I'll talk about my other concern some other time. But that we can add to this list a statement that says this is a temporary list. We can add and subtract to this list as we move forward, and I'm hoping that would help Jason and everybody else who has concerns about it, because I know I have concerns that we only have 18 months to design an entire new oversight system, and I don't want to spend 4 months doing all this setup work. So I would really appreciate if we can maybe put a statement like that as part of this list before, and then we can move on, I hope.
Yeah. Debbie. Oh, Debbie, you're muted.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Yeah. Oh,
Hopefully it's lowered now.
okay. Catherine.
To me, the thing that's missing from this list is the schedule, and it seems like there's kind of an assumption that because we have 18 months, we will take 18 months. And I guess you know, maybe I'm alone in this, but I'm hoping we could do it in less than 18 months because it's taken us a while to get here.
Yeah.
And I understand there's trade-offs, but that's one of the discussions that I think, that's a discussion I would like us to have in our organizational phase. Is the trade-off of doing this more quickly problematic? Or, you know, do we need that full 18 months or not? I just feel like that is a discussion. If we can do it in less, I feel like we owe that to the community because of the delay in this commission's commencement.
You know, Catherine, I think that was perhaps a sequencing flaw. Samir and I looked at the slide deck having to do with this organizational phase, and what you just brought up is so valid, and it didn't occur to us. So I'm thinking, Samir, maybe we forward, it might help if we just forward to what the calendar would be, and that might make everybody feel a little better. I'm understanding now that this looks like, gee, we're on this important commission, and all we're doing is process potentially for 18 months. So can we forward to the schedule?
Yeah, could I say something as we do that?
Sure.
But I know Sophia was waiting first, so maybe can let her go first.
Oh, Sophia, you had your hand up? No.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so to clarify.
Faith.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I understand wanting to go through the calendar. I think that there have been kind of several of us who've said like, we would like to agree to this, but we'd like to have some flexibility that these themes will change and that there is enough spaciousness for these themes to change.
Mm-hmm.
So before we totally move forward to a calendar, can we clarify that that's what, like, I guess I'm making the request of, I'm willing to adopt these and agree to these themes with the understanding that they may change.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, yeah. Samir, you wanted to also add some additional insight here.
Yeah, so as Sophia mentioned, this was synthesized from one-on-ones between commission members and staff. And just to clarify one thing that Lovisa brought up, the group principles are things that relate to how members of the commission relate to each other, core principles, and so far as respect, non-interruption, things like that, kind of bigger picture parts of what was in the community standards. Whereas principles for output to reflect is what the eventual definition of the board that would review allegations of police misconduct that this commission is tasked to doing, the big picture principles of what that would reflect, just to clarify the distinction. In terms of the calendar, the organizational phase is designed to last at longest a couple months, but I think we can come to that later, or I'm happy to stick with Faith's suggestion of approving this with flexibility first before moving on. And the last thing I wanted to mention is for members of the public, I do want to acknowledge that we're at time that was scheduled for this meeting. And so we're going to try and wrap up quickly and postpone perhaps the scheduling portion of the agenda, but just try to get through the phases of work component in the next few minutes, if possible. Apologies for the delay on that. I know we started a few minutes late. I'll pass it back to Sue.
So I like the way Samir framed that. Can we move forward just kind of under the framework that Faith made that said, yeah, these are good, these things have to be done, but they may not be everything. And we need to have the flexibility to add new threads for other processes as we encounter them. Faith, did I paraphrase adequately? Okay.
No, that's not adequate for me, because simply adding things doesn't allow for subtraction of items. You're making, essentially asking us to agree to these items and maybe add things later. But that's not what I asked for. I asked whether this was permanent or interim, and you're saying it's both, so it's unclear to me what you want here.
Well, your process of developing your values, take that arrow, is your values will be your guiding light. That you may adjust them at some point or add to them, but for the most part, they're a standing piece that guides your work. But the process for putting that together, that's a temporary thing that only is anticipated to take a couple of months, which is why I'm saying maybe it would be better to look at the calendar right now and just see that between the full commission and committees, much of this work will get done in a relatively short time. We're not keeping the processes of doing it in place, only the products. Well, I think, Jason, that you raise issues that are of concern to you, but it doesn't look like they're of concern to most people, not who have weighed in so far, at least not to the degree that we would get cul-de-sac here. So I'm going to request that we can go on and at least move some of these things forward in this meeting. I realize you may not wish to agree to that, but is everybody else good with that? Or not? Okay. Hearing none, can we move? Should we move to the calendar so that people can
move forward?
Yeah. Okay. So move forward in the deck, and maybe we just go right to the calendars. Do you think, Samir? Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to give the city. Try to put these down so I can see. So Samir, I think you would be best to walk people through this, since I didn't have a part in putting it together and don't want to misrepresent the calendar.
Yeah, I'm gonna just go back then. I just to explain this. So apologies for the jumping around a little bit. Committees, during the one-on-one, several people expressed an interest in being involved with bylaws drafting. Others expressed an interest in not being involved in that, but kind of staying involved in values and agenda. The commonality between all members of the commission was a desire to be involved in the values and in the agenda and scoping. As a result, committees allow for essentially allocating to a smaller portion, a subset of the commission, the opportunity to draft technical documents or do some of the background work, and then have everything come back to the full commission for approval. This is in line with city best practices as suggested previously. These would not be exclusive in any way. Members of the commission could join them and be a part of them, and they would not be limited in any way, and would be expected to have all their output documents approved by the full commission. So that in mind, and then secondly, these are the main themes. There's also concern about timing, as Jason mentioned, not spending too much time on this phase altogether. It was originally going to be 3-4 months, and it's got trimmed down to 2, as you'll see in a moment. And then while some folks did have interest in being involved in internal processes and also in community engagement planning, there wasn't a lot of overlap between the number of members of the commission who wanted to do both, which led to the idea of having 2 separate committees. There were some options developed. I'm just going to focus on the first to develop that, but to kind of explain that, and it's this. The sort of one color here is the main full commission, which would meet about once every 3 weeks through the end of February.
Mhm.
There is a second color, which is the purple. That would be an organizational committee that does community standards, internal expectations, and drafts bylaws, and which would meet in the gaps between today's meeting and the other 3. And then there would be a community engagement planning committee, which would develop the framework for community engagement, not necessarily conduct it, but just develop that and develop a plan. The engagement plan and the bylaws would go back to the full commission, which would have separately developed as a full group values and principles and agenda and scoping. We did look at some alternatives, and I'll just run through what those were very briefly here. One was to try and have a single committee that conducted both of those 2 tasks. And the other was to have a single committee that did the same thing as in the first scenario, just the bylaws and internal processes, and then have the full commission do the engagement planning as well. As you can see, there's pros and cons to all 3 written up at the front. That's based on sort of the concerns that people brought up. I looked at the notes from the one-on-ones, and in so doing, we developed the idea of doing the first to try and allow not overburdening any one part of it and getting done in February. The one downside is if you want to do everything, you're going to 2 additional meetings over the next 2.5 months. The second option does still not overburden the full commission, but it kind of forces people who are interested in community engagement and bylaws drafting to be on the same committee, even if they're only interested in one or the other. Third one, it puts a little bit more work on the full commission, and as a result, it would need to be spaced out more to not kind of to allow for more time to develop work in between the meetings. And as a result, this would probably go into early March instead of February. Just looking at sort of realistic expectations from similar commissions. So that's the 3 options, but primarily the focus is on this first one, and gives you a rough time frame of the dates. The next step after this is picking the specific dates, but for at least the first couple of them. But just wanted to lay it out here. Again, everybody would be on this first color, the full commission. You could choose to be on one or the other or both of the committees as well.
And probably the reason that it's important to have a format to go forward with this tonight is that everybody's ready to get to the work And there needs to be a process to move these things forward. So I read these when I'm just going to step outside of my facilitator role and say I've had more time to look at this. I've had a day or so to look at this. And it just seems to me that option one, if you don't want to just burden one group of people with both bylaws and the community engagement, you want to spread that out a bit, and you want to not go into March, and you want as expedited a process, that option one is kind of a no-brainer. To my mind. So I don't know whether you'd like more time to consider these, but it or not. I know Jason is not happy with this, but I'd be interested if others are not happy either, or if you think you can make a decision about this tonight. Jason, you have your hand up. I'm sorry. Did you?
All right. So I think you're into illusions here. Yes, I do. You're drawing us into a lot of conclusions here with your language, and it feels like we're being pulled into a decision you may not be ready to make at this point. I haven't seen these documents. You have. Have other commissioners seen these documents?
I will say
Other commissioners had a chance to review these?
I did. I discussed this with my one-on-one with Samir when he was asking us about this, but not specifically the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the governance of these committees and commissions are as important as the content, and really make or break the content. It's very important work to make these decisions.
So your problem then, Jason, is with the time frame, but not the decisions not the topics on which these decisions have to be made.
There's a lot of questions. I mean, all three of these options drive a lot of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
If I could say something.
Yes, please.
Hi, C-Mob here, he, him. I think the issue here, and I'm feeling, Jason, is that to have been presented this as a packet to consider coming into this meeting maybe a week in advance would have given us a little bit more lead time to be able to do the homework, to feel like we can make a confident decision and or offer our amendments, edits, whatever it may be. So I think that is what might be causing a little bit of separation within our groups here, yeah, or within our team.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to absorb without advanced review for sure. So unless others want to speak to another method going forward, it seems to me that the PAC wants to defer on choosing these options for time frame and the list of things that are to be planned for within this framework.
Well, again, I mean, that might be the most, I mean, that's an option that I'm considering. I can't speak for everyone else, but the thing is that if we are to consider things moving forward to help us plan, it just help if like we'd be able to make a decision over here and we'd probably be a whole lot more confident. I'd feel, speaking in I statements, I'd feel a whole lot more confident if we had this and we're not getting it during our very first public meeting to actually kind of review and make a decision upon. So yeah, if we can also kind of template this as an approach to give us a little bit more lead time coming into our meetings with our homework, to say, it'd help our decision-making process.
I think that was well put. What do others think? Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good for the future. I mean, the question at hand is, what do we do now? right? If we don't make the decision now, when do we do it? We're talking about expedience, but I'd rather do it right and do it quickly. And so the question for me would be, I think that, I think Jason's right. I mean, having it flash on the screen and said, hey, let's make a decision is not appropriate without having lead time. And so the question is, if we don't do it now, when do we do it? Because it has to happen.
Yeah. Nicole, yes.
I'm agreeing with Samid and Jason. I feel like I'm just being, I haven't had to be honest with you, I have not had a chance to review these. And I'm someone that before I make a decision, I really want to review and make sure that I understand and reread it over and over again. And right now I just feel like everything is just thrown at me at once and I'm supposed to make a decision and I have no clue where to go. I just don't even know where to start yet, especially like they said, this being our first public meeting.
All right, well, I think we should table this and move on then. And you all have this now in your deck, and it's unfortunate that you didn't have more time to review it. I completely understand that. So
And I will just chime in real quick and say that I do agree, because when it's just for me differently when Samir was mentioning these things and our one-on-one, I took the time at that moment to figure out what was being said. So I understand if you all haven't had that time, or maybe it just kind of slipped by you. But that's the reason why I feel more comfortable. It's just because I've kind of already discussed them. So considering that everyone else didn't have that opportunity, I'm just agreeing that if we need more time to feel more comfortable, then that's what we should do.
yeah, there was a comment in the chat that since December 18th is tentatively scheduled for a meeting, perhaps that would give people time to review. We could revisit these questions, and then you wouldn't be losing a month in setting up your organizational components. How does that sound to people? Faith?
Hi, yes, can we look at option 3? I think that was the one that was all blended. So that would just mean that the mid-December committee A meeting would be a full commission meeting in which we would make these decisions. And I want to be sensitive in my request to, I think it felt a little jarring to hear you make a recommendation to us on like your perception of what the best was, as none of us had seen it. And so I appreciate your expertise as a facilitator, but as a commission member, I'm trying to stay as neutral as possible in my decision making. So my request would be just that you didn't make recommendations for us in the future.
Yeah,
that
thank you.
felt a little confusing in my decision making process.
Yeah,
So
and you know, I preface it with saying I normally wouldn't do this, and that should have been the big red light for me. So thank you. I totally agree with you. So a PAC member made a suggestion on chat that it be proposed that the commission could take this up on your tentatively scheduled and some other organizational issues that you might want to get moving sooner rather than later, that this would give the commission a chance to overview this slide deck and really understand it and ask next meeting questions if you have them, and return to these topics on December 18th. Would people, that was a suggestion that came in from one of your members, and if we want to accelerate things, it sounds like it might be a good opportunity. Would anybody object to that?
I think I'd prefer, from a professional standpoint, to keep meetings on weekdays, just to have some personal boundaries. But if that is the date that works for the team, then I will certainly make that work.
Since time is getting short, would it be appropriate for a meeting request to go out to everybody and just see if it's even possible for enough commissioners to meet on that date? Would anyone object to that?
I would definitely mark this as a conundrum, and I wouldn't do weekends typically, but for this particular one, I make a great exception, just so we can
Okay.
kind of speed things along. But I hope that we receive these types of packets of information as we consider moving down, as I said earlier, well in advance before we make these considerations.
Absolutely. So people are already coming into the chat saying whether or not they can do a meeting on the 18th or not. So if people want to chime in on whether or not you can attend on December 18th, this might be a good opportunity if you happen to know and you have your calendar in front of you. And it looks like there's lots of can-dos. So, I mean, I think this being the case, and we are over time, maybe this is the point at which we consider adjournment of this meeting. Samir, is there any other piece of business that absolutely needs to be accomplished tonight?
Oh, thank you for everyone's feedback, though. Appreciate it.
All right, any closing comments?
I'm just making sure that we have a majority of the group available for that date before we log out, so that we know what our schedule is, and so the public that's listening has some idea. So I count 7, I think, right now. 8, 9, one maybe, and 1 no. We need 2 more people to have a majority of the group. I don't think we've heard from Eric yet.
I'll do it. I can be there.
And then Sophia, there we go. We have 11.
Yep. All right, well, so be it. Any closing comments? Hearing none. Anything that you need, Samir, for the record of the meeting or anything? Are you good? Okay. Any closing comments? Well, I guess we can adjourn the meeting, and thank you all for being willing to step up and do this work for the city. It's much appreciated by the entire city, and it's needed more and more every day. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Bye.
Thank you.